Eisenhower High School, and this is my original oratory for the state 2022 tournament. I think we can all agree that 2021 just wasn't our year. I wouldn't be surprised if no one entered this year saying, 2022, this is gonna be my year. We're all just hoping for it to be better. You know, I always say that I'm scared of change, but I think the scariest thing from this past year was the lack of change. COVID-19 is still a thing, if not a worse thing. I'm still talking to a camera. The rifts in our political system are so prominent, so wide, that it seems like they may never be fixed. The disgusting, violent, and bigoted actions of everyday Americans did not die out, or even slow. The attack of the Capitol on January 6th, the killing of 6 Asian American women in Atlanta, multiple mass shootings across the country, and to top it off, 850,000 largely preventable deaths from COVID-19. 850,000! That's more than the number of casualties from the Civil War, the deadliest American conflict to date. When we were all kids, we learned about this golden rule. Treat others the way you want to be treated. Where did that go? Accentuated by this pandemic, our society has lost its most basic values. This problem can only be solved by remembering that golden rule and treating others with compassion. First, we'll define the principles of compassion and make the problem clear. Next, we'll take a look at how to solve it, by first having compassion for others, and finally, by having compassion for ourselves. The official definition of compassion is sympathetic pity or concern for the sufferings or misfortunes of others. Now, I'd like to take the liberty of changing this into a more fitting definition. Compassion is empathetic concern for others. I would like you to take a second to think about the news you've seen lately. Does any of this news sound like people are being empathetic to you? So what is the problem? The problem is that we have disconnected ourselves from each other and ruined our ties with one another. We have divided our world, country, and communities into us versus them. America versus China, Democrats versus Republicans, whites versus blacks, young versus old, poor versus rich. British social psychologist Henry Fell conducted a study about this us versus them mentality in the 1970s. His goal was to find the minimum conditions in which people would begin to discriminate in groups, a psychological phenomenon he called the minimum group paradigm. Fell concluded that humans will create bias and favor groups that have illogical determiners, such as hair or eye color, or even the flip of a coin. This means that we will favor people or groups that have similar characteristics to us. And at first this doesn't seem like a problem, but similar characteristics means a similar perspective, which will lead to us actively excluding diversity and empathy from our daily lives. The cracks in our society caused by this exclusion have only been accentuated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Every day, we see more contention between the different groups of society. It is not a coincidence that the number of hate crimes and radical views have not only increased in frequency, but in intensity. Depending on which news platform you frequently view, I guarantee that you will see headlines blaming a certain group for these problems. Everything is either the Democrats' fault or the Republicans' fault. Instead of taking responsibility for our actions as a society as a whole, we blame them for their actions, their opinions, their inherent wrongness. Because I don't agree with them, so how could they be right? How could they be deserving of anything more than blatant apathy? So, the problem is that we just don't care enough for the people we have differences with. So how do we fix our society's compassion for others? How do we change our mindset from us versus them to us and them? American educator Stephen Handel says, instead of seeing people in groups, a better perspective is to see everyone as an individual, worthy of respect, equality, and kindness, regardless of whatever group they may be categorized in. We shouldn't necessarily ignore these common differences between us, but we certainly shouldn't use them to judge people as superior or inferior, or see them as a battle between us versus them. When we divide the people in our lives into stereotypical groups, we never even give them the chance to show their individualism. So we must make an effort to see the people around us as just that, people. People of different backgrounds, circumstances, and life experiences. No longer can we view the people around us as merely representatives of opinions we disagree with. No longer can we say, oh, Rebecca's a Democrat, so she must hate all children. Or, Ben's a Christian, so he must be a reactionary, hateful Republican. When we learn to see past a person's assigned social group, we will relearn to have compassion for them. One of the best English teachers I've ever had gave us a piece of advice that I'll never forget. When we're looking at how best to treat the people around us, we must remember the acronym WWAD. What would Atticus do? In the acclaimed novel To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, Lawyer Atticus Finch represents morality, compassion, and logic. He is known throughout his town for having a kind and non-racist point of view, in a time when African Americans were considered inferior and whites were considered superior. In chapter 3 of the novel, he says to his daughter Scout, "You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb into his skin and walk around in it." To Atticus, understanding meant seeing the best in people and uncovering the truth, like when he defended an innocent black man despite threats from a white mob. Even though it's not the 1930s anymore, we still do have division in our society. This pandemic has created many different arguments and stances about topics like masks, lockdowns, and vaccines. While browsing my social media, I came across a post directed towards anti-vaxxers, people who choose to not get the COVID vaccine. The comments were filled with hateful messages, wishing harm, illness, and even death upon these people. This is the sum of duty. Do not do to others what would cause pain if done to you. Even if it was a complete stranger, someone wishing death upon me would cause lasting emotional pain. We need to choose to see the best in people and how their environment, whatever it may be, affects their opinions. That is what Atticus would do. And that is what we all have a responsibility to do. Even though we all have differences, we're all still united by the fact that we're all people, deserving of inclusion and love. Finally, in order to have this compassion for others, we must have compassion for ourselves first. Last year, I was incredibly successful in my speeches, winning district tournaments and nationally qualifying for not one, but 2 of my events in my first year of speech and debate. Yet for some reason, I felt like I had not achieved anything. I was so critical of myself that I created lies for why I was successful. I convinced myself that the only reason I received praise was because people felt sorry for me. And the only reason I won awards, tournaments were online, so I wasn't actually speaking. I only realized how stupid I was being until I felt how proud I was of my fellow teammates. I had the realization that if I could be proud of them for their amazing accomplishments, I could be proud of myself without feeling ashamed or guilty. When we understand that principle, that we should be just as loving towards ourselves as we are towards others, we will feel compassion. We'll allow ourselves to feel like we belong, that we're needed, and that it's okay if we fail sometimes. We have all seen our society's lack of compassion and the anxiety-inducing problems it creates. We've seen how we can fix this by changing both our view of others and of ourselves. Compassion is being inclusive and empathetic towards all people. Compassion is telling yourself that you don't have to be perfect. Compassion is not a luxury we can afford to lose, it is a necessity. One word which sums up the basis of all good conduct: loving kindness. Do not do to others what you do not want done to yourself. Our society doesn't care about loving kindness. Our society tells you that you're not deserving of love unless you're perfect. Our society is broken. So let's fix it. Thank you.